Hello, everyone. Welcome to the In Conversation with Jason Lujan and Rhéanne Chartrand. We're just going to hold a few more minutes while people join us, but we'll get started shortly. So maybe we can get started with this evening's talk. I'd just like to offer a few words of welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening for a conversation between artist Jason Lujan and curator Rhéanne Chartrand. My name is Nicole Neufeld, and on behalf of the Art Gallery of Guelph, I'd like to welcome you into our virtual space. So this evening, Jason will offer a virtual tour of the exhibition of his work, Under a Star-Filled Sky. He is joined in the space by curator Rhéanne Chartrand, who will be in conversation with Jason about his practice. And at the end, there's also time for questions. So I do encourage you to drop any questions that you have in the chat, and we'll certainly share with the speakers at the end of their conversation. As we start, though, our time together this evening, I'd like to suggest a moment of pause, of reflection, to contemplate the place where we're gathering. Yes, virtually, but also the very real places where you are joining us from, along with the place on which we live, work, and create here at the Art Gallery of Guelph. As a settler who works in a cultural institution, I remind myself that land acknowledgements are a reminder to confront the ongoing effects of colonialism underpinning our institutional history, our structures, and the ways in which we operate. Cultural institutions today are based on a history of deeply colonial methods of representation, and because of the ways that conventional education structures uphold institutions like ours with a position of authority, the stories and narratives that we tell have been accepted as truth that in turn shapes policies and practices with real implications on people's everyday lives. And so it is important to create space, to listen to stories and memories that live on in this community, to learn from ways of knowing and knowledge of this world that challenges, questions, and critiques this very institution. This place we now call Guelph, Ontario, is on the ancestral lands of the Attawandan people and the Treaty 3 territory and lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit. This land, which bears rich Indigenous history, is also home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today, and that are here today and will be here for many generations to come. I offer my respect to our Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Métis neighbors, recognizing that we have a lot of work to do to strengthen our relationships within this community, and that there are many actions that we still need to take towards reconciliation. So I'd like to invite you to join me in offering respect to the elders who steward this land of the past, present, and future, and think and pause and reflect on the actions that we can all take towards truth and reconciliation. And from here, I'd also like to turn things over to my colleague, Sally Frater, who is the curator here at the Art Gallery of Guelph, and also curator of the exhibition that Jason and Rhéanne will be discussing this evening, Under a Star-Filled Sky. So please join us, Sally, when you can.
I'm going right now. Thank you, Nicole. And thank you to everyone who is joining us this evening. Late last year, I participated in a 2-week curatorial exchange that began with a visit from Dr. Heather Atun, who is the Director of Curatorial Affairs at the First Americans Museum in Oklahoma City. That period ranks among the most impactful and transformative experiences that I have had in my career to date. Through conversations with artists, curators, and site visits to museums and galleries, I encountered ways and frameworks of being in dialogue with community and visitors that propose myriad ways that museological sites can exist as spaces in which decolonial action can unfold and multiple reimaginings of the present and future can occur. Heather and I spent time with tonight's speakers during this visit, and we also had the opportunity to see Rhéanne Chartrand's wonderful exhibition, We Are Made of Stardust, at the McMaster Museum of Art. The show, which featured 24 artists and was rooted in Indigenous cosmologies and astronomy, featured artworks that visually expressed how Indigenous peoples make sense of their place in the universe through relating to and reflecting on the sun, the moon, and all the celestial beings in the night sky. It was her work and thoughtfulness around this installation, along with her substantial cosmological knowledge, that spurred us to invite Rhéanne to be in dialogue with Jason Lujan to discuss his Art Gallery of Guelph exhibition, Under a Star-Filled Sky. Jason's mixed media exhibit of 2- and 3-dimensional work also touches on Indigenous cosmology, but it also leads us to think about the construction of installations and the intricacies involved in and the possibilities that are revealed when we open ourselves to the act of looking. I am very much looking forward to their dialogue this evening. Rhéanne Chartrand is a Métis curator based in Hamilton with over 10 years of experience curating interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary exhibitions, showcases, and festivals. She has served as the curator of Indigenous art at McMaster Museum of Art for the last 6 years. Her curatorial work focuses on the praxis of survivance, Indigenous epistemes, relational aesthetics, representational politics, and gratitude. Rhéanne is a co-founder of the Shishkateo Collective, an equity-seeking and advocacy group organizing on behalf of Métis artists and arts workers to increase Métis representation, capacity, and flourishing within the Canadian arts milieu. And previously, she served as a board member with the Indigenous Curatorial Collective from 2018 to 2022. Jason Lujan, who is originally from Marquette, is a multidisciplinary artist whose works in assemblage, printmaking, painting, and beadwork, among other media, explores the exchange of ideas, meaning, and values that stem from engagement between different cultures as a result of travel and communication. He has shown his work in solo and group exhibitions internationally, including the Eamon Carter Museum of American Art, the Art Museum of Toronto, Mercer Union, the Center for Book Arts, New York, Smithsonian Arts and Industries Building, Western Front, the Curitiba International Biennial in Brazil, Center 3 for Artistic and Social Practice, the Museum of Contemporary Native Art in Santa Fe, and the Heard Museum in Phoenix. His work is currently on view at the Denver Art Museum as part of the touring exhibition Speaking with Light, Contemporary Indigenous Photography. An associate professor in the Faculty of Design at OCAD University in Toronto, Lujan is represented by MKG 127 and by Patel Brown Gallery as a member of Native Art Department International. So I will turn the floor over to Rhéanne and Jason. Thank you.
Here we are. So we're going to try something different today where we have Rhéanne and myself. And as you can see, we have R2D2, which is filming us for this Zoom meeting. We're going to move around the space and hopefully R2D2 will follow us along, but there may be a few things. This is not live television, it's just a live Zoom meeting. So hopefully we'll be generous with how we do things moving in and out of frame. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I feel like I'm on a Japanese game show right now.
Oh, you did the
I
sound
think we'll be
effects,
okay.
right?
Yeah, those are the editing parts.
Yeah.
So I think I want to start off by talking about, well, first saying thank you for coming and speaking with me here, and also to the AGD staff, Sally, and those of you who are taking time on your rainy Wednesday evening to the days blur together. To spend time with us here as I go through some of the key objects of this exhibition.
Today is not a good day for stargazing, so we're going to do it with some assistance of works in this show. Too cloudy, right?
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I'll just start off. Let's get down to
Let's
it.
get to it. Yeah.
The idea for this show started several years ago, maybe 2011, 2012, thanks to travel. And I was in Chicago, I went to the Field Museum, and then there was a Pawnee star map. And it was the type of ink on some antelope hide, and it was about 15 inches by 22 inches.
Okay.
Not too dissimilar in scale to some of these works behind me. And I started thinking about this, so let's get our gloves on.
Yep. Mine are on R2D2.
And then I'll try to walk us through my thought process when I saw this, okay?
Sure.
So the thing about these is that, yeah, when I saw the map, it was actually laying flat. And for some reason, museums really love showing hides flat or on a wall like a painting. That's a whole other conversation. But I started thinking about how we see space and how we see the land. And for a map, like a map of the earth, the terrain, looking at it automatically moves you into an abstract perspective. We don't move through the earth that way. We're not a hummingbird or a dragonfly. We move like this. But one of the things about this is that with the star map, it is actually almost a literal way of how we look up. And as we move under the sky, and the sky moves over us, this is still how we see things. So I really like that.
Yeah, that's really awesome.
So then I decided what I wanted to do was maybe talk about that through making an artwork, where as you look through things, we're actually looking through stars. So I made a serigraph with a detail shot of this map. So that way we could literally look through space and look through the stars. So I'll talk to you a little bit about this. One of the things I want to point out is some of the iconography. This is four-pointed star that's pretty prevalent. And we have that where I'm from too.
Yeah.
And as you start going through the Americas, you notice that the four-pointed star is pretty common.
Current,
Yeah. But there's also this line through here, which is the Milky Way. And I did some reading, and there's some commonalities with the Milky Way where it's seen as, it divides the sky, but is also seen as the pathway of souls.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Yes, that's a teaching I received, yeah. That it's the bridge between spirit world and the human plane.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I really like that. He was represented here so prominently. But as I was thinking about how viewing, and that's what informed me about putting this on a translucent surface so that way you can see through it. And then we could technically, if you wanted to, walk the whole exhibition looking through these stars, literally looking through space.
What's really interesting about this is it does speak to what you were saying about how, oftentimes when looking at pictographs or iconography on hide, oftentimes they were worn or wrapped around something. They weren't just always necessarily laid flat. So I like how you take something that would have been activated, and you want people to activate these. I mean, with reason, with class, but and actually engage with them and move them around, because that to me is reflective of how you would actually experience not only the original object that on which these works are inspired, but then also how you would experience the night sky. It moves around us, we move around it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think that's really interesting. Also, in terms of, I see that this one is a bit more faded than this one is. Was there a decision as to why you had this one kind of like a half resolution, or this one is almost full?
It's a different kind of gold.
Okay.
So this one is just wide eight, so you actually get to read. And actually, it's upside down. And then,
Would I put mine upside down? Okay.
and then this one, and then the others are copper. And it's just one of them is gold paint, the other one is gold leaf. And so that just is part of that. The reason I thought about using gold, and this is the question I get a lot. I get a lot of questions like, why gold? Let's talk about the gold on these. It's because if you study gold as a material, gold is not a naturally occurring substance on the planet Earth. It all generated from space. So 100% of all gold on this planet has come from somewhere else. And I kind of thought about that as I was thinking about moving through space and golden stars. One of the things that intrigued me about seeing, and it carries over, is part of the themes of this, right? We're talking about seeing through space, we're talking about experiencing perspectives, is that, let's go over to this shelf and we'll talk about it.
Yeah. Take you folks with us.
Here we are. This one. So one of the things about stars is, I was thinking about the people who made that map.
Okay.
And this is it's about a 300-year-old map. And let's say we were to go 300 light years away from planet Earth, and then look back at planet Earth. And with the right kind of science, we would see the people who actually made this map. And then, so that's
time travel.
It is. It's very unusual. And so I started thinking about, well, I mean, if you were to like, think of maybe a loved one that's no longer with us. You wanted to see them again. Just move in 30, 35 light years worth. Move back 2 million light years worth. See dinosaurs. So it's a very strange way of thinking about things, time and space. And so I wanted to explore the variation of that through my own symbols and through small frames. And that's where these works come in. They're just kind of a collage of different approaches of materials. So like this one is like, it's just the black spray paint, but on a clear surface so that you can see through the star shape, but you don't see the rest of the fields, right? So it's yeah.
So
And then there's other
you're
variations.
playing with that notion of like opacity, transparency, but also obscurity too, like
Yeah.
obscurity. Is it like this?
Sure. And so there's different treatments here. And so it's just me exploring the materials. And there's gold leaf here, but there are also these gold leaves. There's just black, there's space, there's the wall behind us, there's light, there's canvas with other symbols and things on here too, where I render stars in a different form. These are actually more familiar to me from the Southwest region where I'm from. Stars also take this shape.
Yeah. And what's really interesting, that was actually a key question I had in not only choosing to use gold so much in this particular body of work, but just thinking about materials in general, like how do you make those creative decisions of what you want to work with, and why is gold recurring? You alluded to it being a substance that comes from space, but I'm also thinking in terms of its luminosity, its reflectiveness, and how does that kind of speak to some of the things you've already talked about thematically with this project? So,
Yeah.
because I mean, with gold, it is a surface that obscures. You can't necessarily see through it.
It's a matter of weighting and value of materials. One of the things that I do is I go through and I'll take discarded electronic, digital electronics, things that have fallen into disuse and disrepair, that people have moved beyond. I feel like Mickey Mouse with these, but we're going to need these again. And so I was thinking about how to reactivate these objects, give them a new kind of value, maybe recontextualize them as an object that's useful now. And that's where I started using gold. I didn't want something just simply to look like gold. It needed to actually be the object that it is.
Right.
As an artist, I have this bias. I call it the touch test, where when you see something, and as an artist, I'm really bad. I go and I touch it, I can't. And I want to know what it's about. I'm knocking on it, I'm trying to figure things out. And nothing, it's just really kind of upsetting when I touch something that I think is like a rock, it's paper mache.
Right.
Or it's an illusion, it's theater. And I don't really feel, I mean, there's already enough theater in art as it is, I think, sometimes where I kind of want something that's going to hold up past just this moment sometimes.
Right.
And I think having a kind of veracity to the materials is part of it.
I love that word. I love the concept of veracity or truthfulness in artistic practice, but also in storytelling, which is a huge, actually so interesting. A lot of the things that you're talking about were things I explored in an exhibition from a few years ago called Peripheral Visions, and this concept of mapping, of moving through space-time, of how our ancestors quite literally are. If we think about time as a construct, they exist in the present with us,
Yeah.
right? If these parallel histories, these parallel timelines existing. So I like when objects activate that truth that yes, they walk to this physical plane, but there's also their existence in the spiritual plane, and it's running concurrent to us. And I just find that really kind of, it just makes me start to think of Marvel and Multiverse of Madness. But I wanted to come back to these particular works in terms of, I was looking at this and I automatically thought Orion's belt. So whereas there's an intentionality in the layout of the star patterns, or was it just simply kind of free-form placement? Or were you actually making reference, like much of the work in the Animated Stardust was making reference to specific constellations? And so I just kind of wondered if that was a thought process.
I'm not a space scholar.
Yeah.
So I generally I was thinking about stars and the imagery of stars. So I wanted to try different techniques. And when I brought this material to the gallery, I invited Sally, the curator, to make the arrangement as they see fit. And so you can imagine some of these fitting behind others. This was the arrangement that Sally set up. Things behind, things in front, just to see how things play. One of the other things is that I like shelves of orientals because they also are kind of modular, and you can spread them out throughout the wall if you wanted to space it out and kind of colonize along that weird kind of way. And it reminds me of and then you have a variation of a theme or a variation of form, so that way maybe you walked in and you weren't necessarily interested in stars or indigenous cosmology, but then you have a material that you can engage with. Oh, but I do like gold, or I do like experimentation with materials, or I do like these other themes.
So you're kind of using materials as an entry point, thematics as an entry point for audiences who might not be familiar with your work to kind of connect into it.
Yeah.
But I also love what you just said about the ability to reconfigure your work. And I think there's a through line between also your interest in like reconstituting and reconstructing things that have fallen into disuse, and kind of just trying to revivify things or give things a new life or a new opportunity through new articulations, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is really fascinating, because sometimes you don't have to reinvent the wheel, you just need to turn the wheel.
Oh yeah, that's really
right?
cool. Yeah.
And to see things in a different way, which I think is also kind of interesting, because that speaks to the night sky and the way
Turn around.
it
Very
turns.
nice.
It goes like this in our world, right? Which I think is really fascinating.
Cool.
Yeah.
So let's go to the pachinko machine.
We're gonna go play. We're gonna play in the
I don't know about that. But, all right, let's go.
Okay.
Let's turn this around this way. Did you hear that? Is that thunder?
Is that thunder? Did it join us? Did the thunder join?
I don't know. All right, so this is the pachinko machine. I got to get up close
Yeah, you
a
guys
little
can
bit.
use that.
So, okay, we were just talking about, I don't need to be on the camera all the time.
But you're the artist.
That's okay.
Okay.
We were talking about items or things that maybe perhaps are past their time, etc. But there's another avenue I think of. And so as an artist, my interest is, there are people like, what's your art about? Why do you do pachinko machines and these vintage radios and other parts of my output?
Just push this back.
Whatever you want.
There we go. We need to see it
Nice
talk.
job.
Here we go.
And so, here we go. So I often think of, like, imagine you're at the flea market at the center of the universe, or the center of the world, or the major metropolis like Toronto, New York, Toronto, etc. New ideas and things, they're brought in, and new ideas and things are taken out. And as things work their way across the flea market, an item or an idea, object that has a particular sense of purpose here may not have the same kind of purpose over there. So then what happens to it? Right? People adopt it, you see it, you're curious about it, and then next thing you know, you have a sewing machine that's been turned into a coffee table base, something like that. You know, these items are reworked and repositioned so that they're then useful wherever they end up. Sometimes they're taken out of a certain usefulness and turned into a decorative aesthetic. So I saw a pachinko machine once, and I was curious about it. And I was like, I have no idea what it is, but this is definitely not from where I'm from. This says something about somewhere else. And so I bought one. And this is one of them. When I originally got this one, I'll tell you a little bit about this, is that what I found appealing about it was the play field. This one was really beaten up, it'd been waterlogged. The case was destroyed, the play field was yellow and brown, and nothing was polished, it was dry. So I ended up having to remake a case and then rework the playing field. What I found appealing was that the play field is like a flat surface for painting. I thought, oh, I can do something with this.
Right.
I can familiarize it, but I can recraft it with my own two hands so that it has that value. So that when I play it, I'm playing something that I made. And that I'm now familiar with it. I made it so that it suits my personal interests and things. For this example, I happen to have a lot of gold.
Did you replace all of these pins and the circular wheels?
Yeah.
And okay.
So one of the things I like doing is when I rework these, is I like it where you may have a tough time knowing what was original, what's new, what I've done, and what was I just simply cleaned and replaced. And I really like that mystery because one of my favorite art experiences is when you go into an area and you go to look at art and you don't know where the art stops or the art ends. You know, what's art, what's not art. And to me, that feels like a really good analogy for like being on indigenous land, where you're just there and it's like, is that important? You just don't know. So for this, I'll just go ahead and walk you through this. What I did is I took it apart. This part is original. This part is original. This little tulip payoff center is original. This centerpiece is original. But I redid all of the spinners in gold. I redid the centerpiece in gold. I redid this in brass. And I redid these tulips in silver, but I added a little four-pointed star inside each of them. Right. So the tulip is in Japan. The tulip is the symbol of good fortune, and it's taken from the tulip bubble, I guess, in the Netherlands, where it's seen as a fortune. They don't kind of carry over to what happened later, but nonetheless. And so that's why those are called tulips. And then it works and it's functioning. So here's what I want you to do. What you're going to do is you're going to grab this, pull it down, and then just let it go.
It's all the way down.
And then this is where we get to find out just how noisy a pachinko machine is on the Zoom meeting. Yeah, give it a shot.
So it goes all the way down.
Use your thumb like this.
Okay.
And then let go. I mean,
Darn it.
but it's it's fully functional. But then when I redesign them, I don't intend them to be used as toys or objects. So that's why I use precious metals, because maybe it's left as an aesthetic experience.
Right.
I sometimes get questions about why do you continue to do pachinko machines, or what is sometimes some of your elements are from Asia, North America and Asia are my two common sources and reference points. And it's that, well, in the case of pachinko, I see this as not as a cultural experience for me. I'm not trying to imagine what it's like to be a person from somewhere else. I will never know. All I know is what it is to play this here and now in Canada as myself. I see it as an aesthetic experience. Okay. And that's why I enjoy it. That's why I collect them when I rework them. I have quite like 16 of these. Yeah. And I've only been able to redo 4.
So it's kind of a labor-intensive process of not restoring, but reimagining like these pachinko machines.
It's a combination of both. Yeah. But also it's just so out of the element. I think when people see these, they know it's not here. And they're like, well, what is it, sort of? And then there's some mystery there. That's what I like. So if you look closely, maybe you'll learn something about the structure and the aesthetic of the structure. and learn more about material language in that way. And that to me is really important.
Yeah, and again, the recurring theme of materials. Maybe we should have done gold balls.
I have those. Look at brass. Anyway, the thing is you can't play this too much because then you start banging up the gold, and we don't want to do that.
So this is not an interactive piece of the exhibition, folks. If you come see the show, no, you cannot play the pachinko machine.
Right, don't play the pachinko machine. Okay,
Did you want to move on to the titular work of the show?
let's go to that one.
Yeah.
You want to move us?
Hey, folks, we're going over here.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
All right, so this is gonna be fun. So, so this one doesn't really show up in camera very well. So I'm gonna ask Nicole to, can you do me a favor, Nicole, and just bring up the picture of the actual artwork so people can see.
You got it.
Thank you.
We have a whole PowerPoint in front of technical difficulties.
There it is. So I'll just walk us through this briefly and then we'll see what we can do. So I wanted to get the things that we talked about, seeing through space, seeing through indigenous, the lens of indigenous lens of the sky, space, and take it kind of, move it out of the realm of an aesthetic into a concept of kind of an action or performative action. So I asked the HEG to loan me an artwork of theirs. And then what I did was I got some art, I put some gold leaf stars on it, but then it looked too much like Christmas wrap. So then I took it out to the roof of the studio, left it out there for about 2 months. So it's very weathered now. But the gold is held up okay. But it's got, the tarp itself has rips and tears. And then we went through and I wanted a piece of art because what I wanted to happen was I wanted to wrap this, I guess for lack of a better phrase, starfield around this artwork so that the art that had to look through indigenous space to see the outside world, and consequently we as viewers had to look through the same space to see the art object, and there was a lens in between. So we have this portrait. Okay, you can put us back on camera. So I've never done this, so I need you to volunteer.
Sure.
Let's take this off.
Is there a particular way you want
It's just straight off. And I feel like, let's hold it up in front of this, because you can't, the thing is since it's wrapped around, you can't really see all of it. But you can see like some of the damage there and the stars here. So, I mean, I feel like what we could do is get over here.
Okay.
Just walk over here, stay there. I'm gonna kind of, I'm gonna wrap you in, and then you tell me kind of what you're thinking. That you are now arts.
I am now a piece of art. I'm into this.
So what's it like in there?
It's a little warm. It's very opaque and obscure. It's very hard to see any sort of distinctive forms, but I can see shadows.
Can you see me? You can see shadows?
Shadows. I can see the distinction between light and dark.
Yeah.
But yeah, I couldn't tell you what color eyes you have or what the detail is on your jacket.
Huh.
Yeah.
So I feel like we can get this, grab the other side. And let's kind of do this for a while. So let's see, what's it look like in there?
What's it look like in there?
Can't tell.
Nicole, Sally, what do you see?
Look.
I see opaque, semi-opaque layers.
You see any of the stars?
I just saw one, saw another one go by, yep.
It's like moving abstraction in so many ways because you do see light coming through and then shadows, but other than that, it's really hard to figure out what's going on. It's amazing.
Okay, cool. So that's kind of what I envisioned. So this was a really nice way of thinking about the concept and also.
Yeah. I'm also kind of curious as to why you chose this particular portrait. Was it an aesthetic choice or did this person have any significance in your selection?
Yeah. Well, one is you notice they have a nice school detail.
Yes, yeah, which is very common in historical art.
I
went down to the collection, and to my knowledge, the art gallery book has like something close to 11,000 objects in the collection. I was hoping for maybe some sort of, I needed something that was human scale. So I couldn't get something that was a 6-inch figurine. The closest approximation is a series of portraits of local wealth personalities. It actually, it needs something completely different if this is a woman and I'm wrapping plastic around. Can't do that, you know. So it's better to have this, but this is just a work of art. It's a portrait. It gives us a really good reading of when I talk about seeing through space, the art having to look out. This is a nice way of illustrating that. Because in this case, this is a portrait of a person with eyes, and they're literally looking out.
It's also at eye height, so that it's height of also intentional decision.
Yeah, they made it just to lift this up to the roughly 5'9", 5'10" size of the person.
For someone like me, I'm like,
Okay, let's see if we can figure this out.
getting it back on.
Yeah. So that's what I did. And I've done this before with other artworks where in New York I got other military portraits of people. That's fine. You can always adjust it.
We'll have the professional curators come
They
back.
have this thing bolted down pretty good. And then I wrapped like some statuary from New York before too. So it's
So
a
this is-
common thing.
Yes, this is an extension of kind of modes of working or practices that you've employed before. And that was actually kind of one of my core questions of this show, with the exception of Apache Gold and the Pottery Shards series, which are older works. A lot of the work in the show was created in the last 3 years or so. And so I guess it might seem like a basic question, but working with these materials during the pandemic, what were some of the challenges you encountered in doing that work? But especially working, you know, you have a studio space, so that obviously made it a bit easier, but you know, what was your kind of process? And going a little bit further, what are some of the through lines between your older work? Because I'm more familiar with your photographic practice and some of your video work, and kind of where are the parallels or distinctions between this body of work that's presented here and your kind of over as a whole?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So I think I'll just walk you through like a little bit of my practice. So originally I have a painting and I made paintings. And then I moved to New York City from Boulder, Colorado. And suddenly painting felt so less urgent than what I saw happening. I didn't feel like I could respond to things quickly enough with just painting. So I switched over to media. And I started doing photography, video, multimedia. And then that was great in New York. I could literally go out on the street, film things, download media, reinterpret it, and have a perspective and ideas and concepts around that. And that's actually where some these kinds of ideas behind exchange started to happen.
Sorry, Maria Hopfield has asked you to turn towards the laptop when you're speaking.
Got it.
So your voice is visible.
Okay, so you can receive some instruction. So I moved to New York and I started painting. I mean, I stopped painting, switched to media. And then I met my now wife, Maria, who is a performance artist in sculpture. At the time, I was still making videos and two-dimensional work. But something really funny happens when you start sharing a studio with someone who starts making objects. There's a kind of cross hybridization that kind of happens. And
Cross-pollination.
yeah,
Sharing,
so
maybe not necessarily, would we say inspiration or just like a new way of approaching?
So the story Maria likes to tell is that we both had different time schedules. I would be there during the day, and I would be at the DO or MoMA or the Met, and then I would come into the evenings. And so it was often the experience of walking into the studio when the other person wasn't there and seeing what the person had done that day. I can only speak from my own experience, but I eventually found myself gravitating towards three-dimensional objects and thinking through that kind of material language. What does it mean to be three-dimensional? How do you communicate certain things using these kinds of materials as opposed to just an image? Even a moving image or a still image, it's still seen a certain way. There's this really good story I remember reading in a Chris Burge biography book. This is the story that goes through my head every time I talk about sculpture. he was at Pomona College, and he was painting as a student. And his professor was one of those established California artists who taught, but because they had to, they hated it, so they just hired his office. And then Chris Bergman decides one day to go into his office, and I forget that professor's name, and says, I think I want to try sculpture. This professor gets up out of his seat for the first time in the semester and goes on this long tirade about how you don't want to go into sculpture. And it's the road, I think there's a quote, it's like, it's the road to financial ruin. And Chris Bergman goes, we'll see. I think about that sometimes with sculpture. And sculpture is actually very challenging.
Yeah.
There's so many dimensions to it, but I feel like I'm up for it. I really have enjoyed making sculptures. But I like going between different media. And the reality check here is that for some reason, most mainstream artists who have many styles, like Martin Kippenberger, seem to be fairly rewarded for having many styles. But I've noticed that as an artist who's native, people have a hard time with that. People expect a native artist to have one particular thing, one particular style, and one particular object. And so they're confused by that.
But I would expect to differ. I mean, I can speak from my own experience, but I actually kind of find it really exciting working with an artist like yourself that has such a wide body of work on which to draw. And had I known that you were working in this space, you probably would have ended up in Myriad of Stardust, because that exhibition was really looking at some literal and conceptual approaches to our relationships in the night sky. And so to me, I don't actually see it as a detriment. I just think it opens up so much possibility of how you can work with an artist. But I would agree that maybe conventional institutions or conventional curatorship would probably want you to stay in a certain lane. But I think that's phasing out. I think we're in this, maybe that was a thing of the 90s or the 80s, but I think it's changing because I think so many younger folks, as an educator, I'm sure you see this, are just working in so many different mediums all the time. So
yeah, I think so. I think maybe urbanization has something to do with that, but it's been a slow process. But I just have so many ideas, and I have so many. I'm curious about the world, everything around it, that I really feel I need to go out and explore as much as I can through materials. I would be very unhappy if I just had to do one thing or feel straight that way. And I've had conversations with artists who told me they feel the same way. That particularly Canadian artists who feel that they have to make a particular kind of work, but they're not very happy making that kind of work. But there's no real, they don't really feel they have any options. Since I just recently moved here, I guess I'm naive, but I'm trying to, I feel like I have the freedom to do that. But also being surrounded by so many great artists. I've met so many artists in Toronto and such good conversations. So I think sometimes that when I make the work, I'm speaking to other artists as well.
And I think that that's the beauty of a gallery space or showing your work in public spaces, is you are not only engaging with the curator you're working with to create the show, but then also other artists that come to see it, other curators that come to see it. So that kind of brings me to my next question, and maybe we'll kind of do a little bit of a spin around.
Let's change the terrain. Yes.
Maybe in the corner,
Where do you
so
want to
they
go?
can kind of see this expanse of the space.
Oh,
Yeah.
Here, I'm going to drink this.
And the reason why.
We can look at the camera.
Yeah, and the reason why I want to do this, we can get as much of the work into
This is great.
Yeah. Kind of walk me through the process of creating this show with Sally in terms of the placement of the works within the space. And the reason why I'm asking that question is because you're playing with these ideas of light and dark, of shadow, of obscurity, of revealing or hiding certain things, seeing through. I'm just kind of curious about the relationship between works and how the placement of things is maybe either opening up or constraining that visual conversation.
Okay, so black emphasizes color and contrast as much as white. And when we were installing the show, the original idea was we were going to paint the walls black and not light any of it. And then people would have to use the flashlights on their phones to look around. The reason I like that is because the idea of coming into a space and being able to see everything
is kind of a Western concept. The idea of shadow is
That's
where you
true.
see something and things reveal themselves slowly. Things come into view and they disappear from view. And then it's difficult to take in the entirety of an object or a location without moving yourself through the area. Was something very appealing to me, but they kind of said no.
That's an accessibility issue.
It's okay, but you know, in my mind, I imagine this exhibition. It's glorious.
But it's
And we
interesting.
can, you know,
Yeah, I'm gonna get some lights out. I mean, that's an interesting premise or desire as an artist, because I think it's interesting. It's difficult when you live in an urban environment, as I'm sure you know this coming to Marfa, it's a little less populated than Toronto. And so your sky is different. What you can see in the night sky is very different. And I think what's really interesting about what you're suggesting or what you wanted to do is that if you ever have the opportunity to go to a dark park or places that are largely uninhabited, like the Southwest, like if you're traveling between cities, it can get pretty dark. The sky's actually quite illuminated,
yeah.
right? It's not as just
It's not a void.
It's not a void. So I find that interesting that you would want to create a void, but then
Just look at objects.
yeah. And then having to use the flashlight, that is a great. That's much more interactive, and I find that interesting.
Other artists have done it, and that's kind of where I picked up the idea. I didn't do that, but I do like the concept of shadow and seeing through this things, and that's why. So when I worked at DIA, the DIA Foundation had their program was they would have one exhibition. And the idea was that you could come see the exhibition and then revisit the exhibition in different times, different seasons. The light was different times of day, and kind of in a weird way live with it. So since I worked there, I didn't literally live with it, but I saw it 5 days a week.
Yeah.
I've opened the museum, turned on the lights, so I got to experience art in that way. And so that's why I kind of want to give that experience to audiences, I guess.
Yeah. And so the visual dialogue between things, like I'm kind of looking at this space, and I'm hoping everyone online can
We can talk like
see.
this, yeah.
Yeah. Just in terms of where you kind of decided to place things, this is obviously a particular story that's happening. It's kind of the anchor, perhaps, of your work. So going back, if you look to the front of the gallery with the pachinko machine and the 3-star maps, but then also just moving around the space. So I guess I was just curious about that, because the one kind of non-Indigenous object is shrouded.
So
And there's also this undertone of kind of religion or religiosity or that sort of, what's the term? Sacredness,
yeah,
which I find fascinating.
I think for this piece, it needed to be put against the wall, because if we place it in the center of the room, or we place it at the first thing you saw, in a nuts and bolts thing perspective, that the show would seem to have been all about that.
Yeah.
Who's this person? Is everything about this person? So I wanted to start off with a fun, unknown object that I can rework, and then kind of have this as an idea, so it's just part of the flow. You walk in, you're aware of the maps, you're aware of the pachinko machine, and then you see these other stars, and black on black, wood on black, and other layers of contrast, and then of course the clear sculptures in the room.
Yeah.
We can go talk about one of
Yeah.
these. So you'll have to lift it up.
If it can be seen. I get to pick, where's my gloves? Hold on. Let's get my gloves. So I was really excited about this, and perhaps our viewers online will remember this particular device, this toy of sorts, although it's no longer a toy.
No longer a toy.
But it's a viewfinder. So gently walk towards the camera. It's non-functional, as Jason told me, which was a huge disappointment, because I wanted to look through it and look at some of your photography. That's, I guess, what I mistakenly thought might be inside of it.
So
But
for this one, I wanted to treat this as a sculptural object where it's about the material and how it handles light. So what I did was I took a Viewmaster, I added a slight prism pattern to the front, and then gold-plated steel carousel wheel. There's a ladder, so it only goes down so far. And then what it kind of turns into as it's sitting here is basically the Viewmaster itself just becomes a
a holding display device for the gold carousel on the side.
Mhm.
So that's how it's supposed to function. It's
But I
just-
think it also is still getting at some of the core ideas of this particular exhibition in terms of what you're seeing.
Yeah, and so,
Yeah.
or you can see to the back. So, where's the camera? So you can still see through it, and then you see how the gold works, but you're able to, there's no carousel, picture carousel in here. That would kind of be beside the point. But I did make earlier versions where I wanted the picture carousel to be the art object, and then the viewmaster is just the support structure. And that's where the clear ones with the picture wheels come from New York City or American or things like that.
Yeah, and that's interesting because you created the older viewfinders when you were still living in the States, right? Or did you create any of them
They
here?
did them here.
Oh,
It's
wow.
like Canadian artwork.
Is that like a longing for home, perhaps, or?
I think I just was interested in, so if you look at the design, there's also text right here.
Okay.
I'm not holding gloves, I'm not holding gloves. But it's the text is, it says idea and object. But the
Okay.
text is cut off. When I use text, I like to crop the text off or invert letters because then it adds an element of mistranslation,
Yeah.
which I find very appealing as an artist.
So it's interesting because perhaps you know this from the time I spoke with your class. I'm very much interested in survivance as praxis and these survival strategies. And I see a lot of, not that I want to place that onto you, but I see a lot of some of the things I've kind of conceptualized coming out in your work of this annotation, of obscurity, of refusal, of you know, these sorts of acts to not always provide a linear narrative, right? To not always reveal all the answers. And I think that there's something to be said about work that, and going back to what you were saying about Western culture, Western society, Western art discourse, there's this false assumption that everything must be known, everything should be known. And I think your work really brushes up against it, it challenges that, and saying, no, actually, there's things that it's okay for some things not to be known. And I really think that act of refusal is super powerful because I see your work fitting within this larger continuum of artists who try to do that. And that's what makes the work so challenging and exciting all the same time.
Thanks.
You know what I mean?
I think we should,
Check the time.
let's check the time and then get out our chairs.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I'll get the chairs.
We're gonna now, it's almost 7:30. So we want to open it up to questions from folks online. Jason's just setting up some chairs and we'll get to that.
Which is your side?
Doesn't matter. What's your good side?
So now we're in a talk show format.
That looks good, right?
Is that too far away? Here's what we can do.
I think that's good. Take out
Take
these.
this away. Take all this away. Have a seat.
All right, take again. I think I had it almost positioned properly.
Still do.
Oh, there we go.
There. Now we've changed formats to talk show format, and we are ready for questions.
All right.
This is great.
So welcome to the talk show.
Well, I do have a good opinion.
Are you in the titular role?
Great.
Oh my God. Writes itself.
I know.
I am back. Thank you for that. That was enlightening and revealing and entertaining and pure nonsense. And so the first question is from Nicole, and she was wondering about some of the display strategies. She was curious about how the interactive, or about the fact that these interactive objects are placed within black box.
Clear boxes in this instance, no? Glass boxes? I thought they said black. They said-
Well, yeah, so I just don't want these things to get stolen. That's the practical answer. They're small objects that can be fit in somebody's pocket. And a really famous, successful artist I know had something stolen from the AGO, had a coal box stolen. It's being exhibited at a major institution
So I kind of learned from that. And I didn't want to have to tie things down. Also, these things are very tactile. Going, oh, it's a radio, it's common, it's a radio, it's a ViewMaster. It must be here for me to use. The artist put this here just for me. And by putting it under a case that kind of gives each other, no, you can look, but please don't handle. It's a practical consideration.
But you
in that way.
but you provoke us. No, I'm joking. Well, even with what you're saying about the pachinko machine, you know, it's an object, and the viewfinder and the radio, these are all at one point were objects to use, right? And so there is that natural human response to want to touch. And I'm as guilty of that as you are in art spaces, wanting to touch things. But it is obviously when I guess we would have to talk about the sort of transcendence of the object, right? from functional to art. And that kind of creates that separation. But
so one of the things I've
it's an impressive and smart strategy though to use in your cases.
Thanks. Some of the feedback I've gotten is that when a viewer is presented with an object that they are not familiar with, or maybe don't know very well or have forgotten about, they just assume that's what the object is supposed to look like anyway, and so it's just something that's just an appropriated ready-made. So they assume it had like the radios, or I have other work, and they don't know that I intervened or I recrafted a lot of the elements. And so therefore that gives them a kind of permission for familiarity to handle the object.
Okay, well, we have another question, and it is, the question was, I am curious about the decision to not use labels in the installation.
How do you feel about labels?
I have a love-hate relationship with labels. I will say that as a curator. I obviously want the shows that I curate to be as accessible as possible. And I think it's obviously really important to acknowledge the artist who is the maker of that object. I think with a solo show like this, you can get away with perhaps not having those didactic labels. What's really, this is an aside, but I think it might still be a little bit relevant. Within the museum world, we refer to didactic labels, object labels, as tombstone labels. And I have a lot of difficulty, a lot of problems with the terminology we use within the museum field to describe what it is that we do or what things are in space. And so tombstone has always not sat very well with me. So I have in some of my projects opted to not include wall labels and instead provide like a leaflet or a handout that lists the works mapped out. And also because I do find it to be visually instructive at times. So every project is different. I don't always use them, but I also see the necessity of them sometimes. So what about you?
I hate it.
There we go. That is why they're not here.
I mentioned originally how I don't like, I feel like the label interrupts just the viewing. I feel like it lets you know what's art, what's not art, which is not my jam. I'm often pretty good with a map or a brochure that's nearby. I don't see one, but there would be a map or a brochure. So if someone needed more, wanted to know something about an object, they could read about it. But oftentimes those just simply state the title of a work and a location anyway. I kind of prefer someone to come in, look around, maybe be confused. I like confusing people. I like confusing myself. And then just have that straight cold read experience. It's kind of like playing pachinko. So people ask me about playing pachinko. They're like, what's up with you and pachinko? And I said, I have no idea. But what will happen is I'll go to the studio and I'll turn on a machine. I have some that I play that are not artwork. And I'll play it. You play pachinko and then you're like, for maybe 30 minutes, and you're like, all right, I get what this is about. I'm done. I figured it out. Okay. And then a couple hours later, you find yourself thinking about playing pachinko again, and it just kind of turns into this thing. And that's kind of how I feel about looking at art. Come in, look around, and maybe later, what was that about? And then it leads you on your own journey.
I think it's also, your decision to not include those labels might also, and correct me if I'm wrong, speak to this idea of ways of looking and how everyone comes to art from a different lived experience. And so they're going to see things differently. And so in some sense, you know, I'm being really plain here, but like, what is the point of a label if somebody's going to interpret it from their worldview?
Yeah.
And so what's interesting about some of the works in here, it is about challenging those ways of looking while also not being too prescriptive, I think.
Yeah. I mean, most of these works are untitled. Some of them have titles, but those titles are largely vernacular titles, like the map painting, the Pawnee map painting, or, you know, the view mask, things like that. But largely it's just about the aesthetic experience for me.
I think that also ties into Rhéanne's point about this refusal that's contained within the work, and that tension between here's something, I'm revealing something, but I'm not necessarily going to give you all of the information. And I'm not necessarily going to reveal everything to you. I have a question. I was speaking with an artist late last year, and this artist was saying that that they placed a high priority on visitors having a really rich aesthetic experience of an installation, and that they really wanted to prioritize having sort of enticing or engaging aesthetics or objects on view in their shows, because they said otherwise they would write a book. So that artist's name was Jason Lujan, but there are two texts in particular that sort of undergirded or that have informed parts or works that are in the show. And so one of them is In Praise of Shadows, and the other one by Junichiro Tanizaki and House Made of Dawn by N. Scott Mamade. And I was wondering if you could speak a bit about, even if you don't want to go into detail about how those two works have informed the work, but just about the idea of text kind of making its way into this installation.
So we talked a little bit about the shadows. I took a lot of that language when we had that earlier from that book, In Praise of Shadows. And it's been a huge inspiration. House Made of Dawn was written by Jemez Pueblo, Southwest United States writer. And there's a particular chapter, and it's about the travels and travails of the protagonist is named Abel. He returns from World War II, or the Korean War, has a hard time fitting in. And then it's just the story of that. There's a painting here that we're looking at now, and it's called The Ninth Chamber. And I recently went back and I reread that book. And that part, what happens is this character lapses back into alcoholism, you know, running in the street, kind of schizophrenic, and then runs across this messianic character, indigenous messianic character. And then it's not a good story. It's not like the person is saved. It's not like the Christian trope of, oh, the messianic character saves you. In fact, it kind of goes in the other way. But as I thought about that, I envisioned like the hills and the mountains of the Southwest and the stars and the whole mise en scene. And that's kind of how I make this abstract, which we'll show you here in a minute. Or Nicole can play us out when we end by putting that as the placard. The thing about N. Scott Mamade, so Mamade is that he was one of the first, as I was an artist, to identify creative constraint of indigenous artists and writers. This is a writer who traveled extensively through Russia and Siberia and has published several books of poetry about that. None of those have been critically received. In fact, all of the critical interest and academic interest is simply on his story about being an indigenous person in the Southwest. And he's pushed back against that. This is why some artists like Carl B. in Canada are very important to myself as well. And so I feel a bit of kinship with that writer and the kind of, just the desire for creative freedom.
I love that because I would say I've included Carl's work in almost all of my projects because I love what he presents. And I recall reading a path, like he was being interviewed and somebody said he creates artists for thinking people who think. So when you engage with his work, you're not coming, like you have to actually spend time with it. It's not just, here's a pretty picture. Right. You know, he actually has something to say and it's his perspective on the world, and that may or may not be Indigenous, and so there is a kinship there.
Well, in terms of signifiers, you're right.
Yeah, signifiers.
Oh, there was something else. There was another idea in there somewhere. I don't know. Oh, right. So there's, I use a lot of Asia, and people are like, what's up with that, Jason? I'm surprised that's not in the question queue. I was actually, didn't really think much about it, but then I started hanging out with this artist named Jason Lujan, who's no longer with us.
Yeah.
Living in New York, I had just moved there, not quite in my 30s. He would come to town like once a year for something, either work or some sort of job, and we would hang out a lot. He would always either call me because he knew I was good to take him to a bar or go to a club or have a sushi dinner. He would always pick the restaurant and we'd go out and have a good time. And he was the one who introduced me. He would always talk about Japan. He had a good experience there. He traveled there under various United States residencies. And so that's kind of what got me thinking about like trans-global concepts, trans-global communications on ideas and hybridization of cultures. It's not about getting two things and making them the same. It's about kind of upgrading of ideas, because that's actually reflective of how we live nowadays anyway.
Really, especially in the urban environment, for sure. Yeah.
There is another question from a person named Maria, and it is, I spy some toy business going on. How much of your work is about play and craft?
Yeah, that was definitely something I was curious about too.
Well, okay. What my wife doesn't know is that I've gotten to the point where I buy more pachinko machines and I'm sneaking them into the house because I don't want them to know that I bought another pachinko machine. So I'm glad we're not recording this. There is a lot of play, and a lot of that play actually is, keeping multiple bank accounts going so that I can support my hobbies and also make art with them. It's just a general curiosity of how things work. I mentioned before how when I see something, I don't know what it is, I want to figure it out. And that's kind of where it comes into that. The toys, it's just, I'm Gen X, and I think there's a certain degree of arrested development. People my age, males my age, where we just kind of want, we never had anything cool like this. I kind of want it now. But then I always find a way to turn it into art, because I'll see something and then in my mind I go, how would this look this way? What would it look with this? How do I familiarize it to myself so then it becomes like mine? And that's where the art comes into that. But toys are actually a very easy starting point because they're designed to be not precious to begin with in a kind of way.
I like that the element of play or unexpectedness in exhibitions, and that was being a little bit more playful and risk-taking was definitely an element of We Are Made of Stardust. Sally came to see the show, and I don't like to stick with convention in terms of how I hang shows. Again, this language of curation is problematic to me. The term saying hanging work, let's say place work, where we need to come up with a whole new language for what we do. But within that exhibition, on one of the title walls, I hung the work in an elliptical galaxy, just to kind of, mess it up a little, have there be this sort of unexpected element. And I really think that the way you work and the types of materials that you work with, the objects that you work with, adds that element of play and fun that sometimes can make the lack thereof can make art spaces a bit kind of stodgy and people don't know how to approach it. But adding these elements into things can actually offer some connection points. To your point, you might have another Gen X person who walks in here and is like, I don't remember that, and then they'll never forget your show. So I think that that's really important to take those sorts of creative risks. I too, with Stardust, I had this incredible sculpture by Ken Toki in the exhibition. It was called Maiden Voyager, and it was like this Hopi, maiden sitting on a black plinth, and that was very strategic because I wanted it to look like she was floating in space, in a darkened space. And so I think we can do these sorts of things in curatorial practice and artistic practice that kind of push the limits of what we think art should be, or what art spaces should be, or kind of breaking, I like breaking with convention, but then again, I sit in survivance. So I love that about this particular exhibition is you're offering reference points without actually having to explain them.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Going back to an earlier question, is when I think about an exhibition, I generally think in terms of installation. What's here, what's there, what's there. So that way, as the person moves through, some artists work in simply discrete pieces, but I prefer to have an environmental approach.
Yeah, and I think that that's true about this, which is why I asked that question earlier, you know, the intention.
I just caught up to that.
Around placements of things. Sally, do we have any other questions?
No, I think this is a really great note to end on. I just want to thank you both for some really rich and engaging conversation, and you've given us a lot to think about. I'm really excited to go back into the installation with all of these points that you have raised, these perspectives. This is exactly what Nicole and I were hoping for when we were discussing this program. And I would like to thank you again, and to thank Nicole Neufeld, the Community Engagement Coordinator at the AGG, for all of her work in putting this together, and Corinna Shelley, who also helped with the tech, who is our social media coordinator. And thanks to all of you who are watching. Thank you.